This is going to be your guide for the best weapon perk combinations in New World for all of the weapons. Yeah, this has not been a fun video to make. There's a lot of weapons, and a lot of perks, and a lot of ways that they go together, so I really hope you appreciate this video. If you do, please leave a like, comment your thoughts down below. So if you go, hey, I've used PvE Hammer more than any sane person should, here's my recommendation, that is very welcomed in the comments. So like, comment, share, subscribe, and please give me a couple seconds to plug G Fuel. This is the only thing keeping me going through my gaming and my video making, and it's just great. It tastes great, it's scoopable caffeine, the Focus Complex hits, it's the best energy drink I found. Let's get into this video because weapon perks and perk labels get you into all kinds of shenanigans. So if it shares a label, you can't stack it. So you can't have Enchanted and Vicious to get like super duper auto attack crit damage. There's also some other things you gotta consider, like different procs. Oh, do I want Keenly Empowered, where if I crit, I just get 10% damage for 5 seconds, but it's on a 10-second cooldown. People like their Keenly Jagged because you crit and then you get 70% weapon damage, which is really nice. But also life stealing is good if you're just in there on a melee weapon and you don't want to die, but refreshing move. Also pretty good for cooldown reduction if you're just in there spamming attacks. So yeah, you need to balance out what's going on in the weapon. It mostly comes down to the procs, the damage, and then some of the other stuff. So let's go back over here where I have not been able to afford all of the best stuff. This is mostly just kind of like guidance and acceptability because getting BIS in New World is pretty crazy and pretty expensive. Now this video is mostly targeted for new and returning players for New World Aeternum, and most people aren't going to just jump in and start going for 700, 725 gear score perfection. So it's also about understanding the concessions and trade-offs that you need to make when trying to just get the best weapon you can get. Also, this video mostly focuses on PvE, but there is a lot of PvP considerations, so don't super click off the video if you're a PvP sweat. And we're just going to start at the basics, that you can get a good starting weapon if you just buy it from your faction. That this comes with Enchanted, gives you strength, but also if you're going for like Gauntlet or some kind of mage build, you get refreshing move and it's kind of guidance on what you want. But then when you start getting into other weapons, you know, purple, that's going to give you 2. Orange, that's going to give you 3, then we can start focusing on different things. And I'm going to start off with Greataxes, Greatswords, two-handed melee weapons, because that's pretty much mostly what I've been playing, and I'm very experienced with it. So crit modifier is going to be Keen, damage modifier is going to be Trenchant Strikes, your proc is going to be Life Stealing, but you can also mix this up, that there's Enchanted. So you can have Enchanted instead of Trenchant Strikes. I just like the Trenchant Strikes because it's mostly heavy attacks, and if you go into the Greataxe, heavy attacks are going to give you Grit, and then you're just like, okay, I tank everything, and I just get way more damage. Enchanted goes up to 5% damage on light and heavy attacks, and if you're mostly focusing on heavy attacks, then Trenchant Strikes is going to be 23% damage if that's mostly what you're going for. So yeah, pretty important. Also, we have Vicious, which just gives you 7% critical damage, so if your abilities are critting, you're getting more damage than the Enchanted. Also, there's Thwarting Strikes, 7% damage while you have active Grit. Well, interesting thing is, if you go into Constitution and you end up with 300 Constitution, all of your basic melee attacks gain Grit, so that's just better than Enchanted if you're going into high Constitution. Also, certain abilities will give you Grit as well. Sorry if it's already getting confusing because I'm trying to show you the different options and optimizations you have for the different perk slots, and we've only talked about Greataxes. And then there's this really cool thing called Mortal Power, which gives you 15% empowered for 20 seconds on a kill with a 1-second cooldown, so you can keep refreshing it. Now, this is bad against bosses that don't have like any minions for you to kill, and also if you're just like engaging and initiating a fight, you don't have it. But if you're in a huge crowd of enemies and you just like take out something weak and it's just like a flood of enemies, yeah, you're actually keeping up some really high damage. Also, if you look at the weapon itself, there's a base critical hit chance and then a critical damage multiplier. So if you actually compare that to something like Keen is going to give you 5 to 7% crit chance. And depending on your weapon, that's going to give you a 30% critical damage modifier. So it's not like, oh, I have a 7% chance to double my damage. It just gives you 30% more damage. So actually, Keen, it's good if you have like a lot of critting effects, because the Greataxe makes it to where you get lifesteal on crit. And there's also other effects that give you like crit depending on the enemy's health and how you engage with them. But overall, it's like, oh wait, Mortal Empowerment is just better than Keen. And then with Trenchant Strikes and Lifestealing, I'm an unkillable, super crazy, high damage machine. So on two-handed melee weapons, Mortal Power is really what you want, and then you're going to want some kind of proc effect, and then a damage modifier. And again, it's kind of take what you can get, depending on what it is. If you can only get Enchanted, that's going to be fine. If you're not 300 Constitution, yeah, it's okay that you don't have Thwarting Strikes. Trenchant Strikes, that's just going to be like the GOAT for all the heavy attacks. And other than that, maybe you get something else that sounds good. So here's the thing, every ability has a perk. The perk is stronger when put onto a weapon, and certain weapons want that ability over something like Vicious or Keen or just whatever other modifier is going to be on it. So Vault Kick increases critical chance by 38% for 7 seconds. Yeah, you kind of want that. And then if you have Vicious, well, you're just doing more critical damage with more critical chance, and then you can also get empowered on a critical hit. So there are some ways you can combo depending on the weapon. But also, it's not bad to have a spear with Enchanted, Mortal Power, Refreshing Move, or something like that. Ignore the Enfeebling Skewer, I just kind of want to show, like, yep, Enchanted, Keenly Empowered, that's just fine too. Next, let's talk about bows and muskets. You do not want Keen on these because a headshot is a crit. So if you're getting headshots like you should be, then you don't need Keen to give you any extra critical chance. But you do want Vorpal, and then you have Keenly Empowered, so headshot then converts into 10% Empower for 5 seconds, and then you can just make the follow-up shots do even more damage. And this is where we start seeing differences between melee and range, because you can have shirking, so after dodging an attack, you just deal a huge burst of base weapon damage, or you have attunement, which just kind of modifies less damage onto every shot. So the attunement deals a little bit of extra damage with a 1-second cooldown, but if you're like lining up your headshots, it's just bonus damage, and that's going to be really good. And then things start to get expensive real quick. Vorpal, Enchanted, Keenly Empowered. Yeah, that's all the stuff you want, and yikes. Yeah, unfortunately, before the Eternum update, the servers are pretty dead, so it's hard to kind of like find examples of like crazy BIS range weapons. But you do want the Arboreal Attunement for PvP, because people are doing less specking into the nature resistances. It's mostly going to be fire protection and void protection, and we're also going to talk about gem augments later. So like Arboreal, Keenly Jagged, because then that's bleed for that crazy extra weapon damage on a single target with the headshot damage. Yeah, it gets crazy, but it's kind of hard even finding like different combinations and stuff. That's on a spear and it's 50k. Now, for the most part, there's not going to be a lot of bow and musket in PvE, but the reason why I'm still giving it consideration is because what if someone wants to do it? They still want to feel useful, or they want to run around with some kind of ranged weapon, and then depending on their scaling, they can also go into different weapons, because like Spear, that's going to scale with Dex. You go Spear Musket, you go Rapier Musket, you can have fun like that. Same thing on the bow, which is going to scale with Dex, and then Musket Intelligence is also going to give you some options. But the Blunderbuss, that's a lot more fun for PvE because you have a lot of life-stealing effects. So Leeching, Shrapnel Blast, you can put that on armor. Also pretty good on the Blunderbuss itself. We have life-stealing, and then you can run around with Enchanted and whatever else. So Vorpal, this is more like a PvP one I have, where like, yeah, you claw shot them, you grab in, you get that Empower, and then you go boom, right to the face with Enchanted Vorpal. Nice. Mortal Refreshment's pretty alright, and for PvP, yeah, like Keenly Jagged, that's also really nice because one of the pellets is going to most likely find someone's dome, and then you can just get the bleed off of that, and you have other things you can do, so, kind of the same idea, where Enchanted is going to rule. And maybe you want on kill proc and you're good to go, but also shirking isn't bad, because if you're in something's face with the Blunderbuss and then you just dodge and you get that shirking, that's just going to be DPS, even in a PvE situation. Also good against like bosses and larger enemies. The Hatchet. You really want Refreshing Torrent. Ignore Vorpal, you're mostly just getting in there and carving something up. But look at this. Each attack of Raging Torrent reduces all Hatchet cooldowns by 1%, and the Raging Torrent hits multiple times. So that's going to be like huge for cooldown reduction on the Hatchet. Crit chance is good, enchanted is good, but also if you have the grit from Constitution, then that's when you want the thwarting strikes. Life stealing is good, mortal power, good. Yeah, you can have a lot of fun by just kind of like stacking into a Hatchet. Next, let's talk about magic weapons. So, refreshing move, going to be pretty good. Refreshing Pillar of Flame, it's just going to give you huge amounts of cooldown reduction. So the Fire Staff is something that you generally want to put a really powerful weapon perk onto. So yeah, reduces Pillar of Fire's cooldown by 21% per hit. You just get that 40% right there. Refreshing move is going to give you the 2.4 every 5th of a second. And then you want Keen over Vicious. And also having Flame Attunement on a Fire Staff is going to be good because your rings and your weapons are going to have like Flame Harnessing and Flame damage on them. So you just get like bonus damage on top of the bonus damage perk. And that's going to proc really regularly as you're constantly hitting with the Fire Staff. Empowering Meteor Shower, Keenly Empowered Keen. That's also another very big Fire Staff. There's also Keenly Empowered, Empowering Meteor Shower. This is mostly going to be for PvP, but still really powerful, pretty expensive. Empowering Fireball is another one that people put on their Fire Staff because plus 58% damage to high health targets. That's going to be pretty nice. And then there's that Flame Attunement. So yeah, a lot of different ways you can run the Fire Staff in PvP and PvE. I think Refreshing Move, Mortal Power is going to be really good on a Fire Staff, but having Keen Empowered, Enchanted, Flame Attunement, or some kind of other ability offensive is going to be pretty nice as well. Gauntlets, Ice and Void Gauntlets, they want the Refreshing Move since you're mostly going to be a caster. Having Enchanted is also just going to augment your auto attacks in between the casts, and then you can go with Keen, or you can also put Weapon Perks. Now, Blessed can also be on a Void Gauntlet if you're going for a more supportive build. So that's also going to be a decision that you make with the Void Gauntlet, but you do want Refreshing Move, and then whatever else you can get on it. Life Staff wants Fortifying Sacred Ground, Blessed, and Refreshing Move. Yeah, good luck with all that, but if you have Blessed, Refreshing Move, that's going to be awesome. Fortifying Sacred Ground, it's going to be very potent on the weapon, but if you get it on armor, take what you can get. There's also Purifying Breeze, which heals for weapon damage whenever you remove a debuff from an ally. So if your build has removing debuffs in it, yeah, you can also get the Purifying Breeze and do pretty well. That's kind of it. Like, Refreshing Move, Blessed, good luck, have fun. And then shields go crazy. All the defensive stuff you can do with a shield just sounds game-breaking. Where it's like, wait a second, I can have Enchanted Ward, Healing Defense, Refreshing Defense, so I just get cooldown reduction while I have like damage reduction, and then you can put life stealing on the shield to apply to your weapon. You can have refreshing and refreshing defense. You can also put Keen and Vicious on your shield, so if you want like a DPS shield build, you can go for it. Like, look at that. Base damage, critical chance, critical damage, ignore sure footing, and put in sturdy, and you got something wild. And then with the sword, you want Mortal Power, Refreshing Move, sword attacks really quick, so you're getting a lot of refreshing move procs, and then you kill something, and you're just stronger. You can have like an offensive perk on the weapon, but you want like Mortal Power, Refreshing Move, Thwarting Strikes. Again, if you're going shield, then you have like high Constitution, and that's just crazy. Or you just have Enchanted, and then it's cracked. The Flail's light attacks also hit really quick, so you want Refreshing Move on the Flail, but Flail also has Blessed for its supportive capabilities, and Trenchant Rend, I think, has some surprising viability, where you just open up with the Trenchant Rend, heavy attack will hit multiple things, that reduces their armor, and then you can do the quick attacks to get the Refreshing Move, and then you have Blessed, and that's a way you can play it. Mortal Refreshment is good, but also Mortal Fortification on like Sword and Shield or Sword and Flail, also going to be really good. Actually, is Mortal Fortification just good to slap onto anything? Who cares about the extra lifesteal you get on a two-handed weapon where you put lifesteal on your ring, you get a little bit of extra leeching effect inside of your weapon tree, and then you go Mortal Fortification and you're just taking less damage almost permanently. And that's an effective hit point pool, which is kind of like a leeching effect. Also on the gauntlets, we talked about Refreshing Move, Keen, Enchanted, Weapon Perks. Well, what if you just get a kill on something, and now you have crazy fortification while being supportive or a ranged caster. And then the last thing to talk about is the rapier, and if you pay attention, we can kind of see a trend where you have omnidirectional evade into shirking. That's just good. Refreshing move, omnidirectional evade, shirking, enchanted, have fun. I'm not even going to get into the shenanigans of the degenerates that use this in PvP and how you build out that. Now, rings are where things get interesting, and I might have misspoke earlier in the video about, oh, you want to get blank damage and then keen awareness on your ring and you're good to go. But actually, it's the same kind of damage modifier. So you have to choose between primary damage buff, which is just going to be better. Like we talked about, the critical chance gets kind of weird with like the crit damage modifier, whereas you can just get flat damage. You just always do more slash damage, more whatever damage. Which also brings consideration into other things that you have. Do you have crit on your ring? If you do, then you don't need it on your weapon if you're going for keenly empowered. But as we talked about, keenly empowered, kind of whatever, more PvP than PvE, doesn't have a lot of uptime. So that's where the trade-offs are going to be. You can ignore crit for the most part and just go for like raw, consistent damage. And that's still going to be really good. So you go damage type, leeching, and then cooldown reduction or something like that. Also, bloodletting on crit kind of works if you have the keenly jagged, since it gives you like a little bit of extra bleed, and if you have other bleeds inside of your build, maybe. Also, just kind of a free place to put luck, where if you get luck, damage type, and then leeching, well, now you've got an incredible PvE weapon because luck is very powerful. And then healers, healing efficiency, gotta have that. Healing breeze, gotta have that. Purifying, also really good if you end up with that instead of healing breeze. And then cooldown reduction, fun stuff. Oh yeah, also keenly jagged, if you're in like a PvE scenario, not that great because it only applies to one target, even if you're doing like multiple hits or something, and then it has that cooldown. Wanted to say that somewhere in the video, don't remember if I did. And then, finally, for the last thing, we can talk about gems. So, if you're running a tank build that has taunts, you're going to want to put in a cut pristine carnelian. Now, when it comes to getting damage, there's different ways that people go about this. So, cut diamond is going to give you damage or outgoing healing while at full health. So, life staff, no brainer. But also, if you're like going to be safe as a ranged character with a bow, with a musket, you just get free damage on every hit. However, you get slightly more damage against high health opponents with the cut onyx. So if you want that insane leading headshot burst, yeah, you can put an onyx on your musket and it's going to go pretty well. Now you can go the other way and get execution damage against targets below 50% health. So this is going to be pretty good with a two-handed melee setup or some kind of leeching build where you're just swinging at them, they get low, you get the damage amp, and you just keep on going and you're life stealing through it. And against like large crowds of enemies, some are going to be low, some are going to be full, and you just kind of go infinity off of that. The cut opal is something people say a lot of, where it's like, well, if you're always dodging, or if you're using a greatsword and you're costing a lot of stamina, or if you have a shield and you're costing stamina, then you just always have 12% damage. I think that's overrated, and if you're actually inside of combat and like dodging or in a stamina situation, just use the Jasper. Jasper is so strong, I socketed my artifact greatsword just so I can get the damage, because you gain a stack of 8% damage for 5 seconds after blocking or taking a hit. That's kind of the whole thing about the greatsword, and then you just get up to 3 stacks. So if you're just brawling and you're fighting and taking hits, the retaliate is going to be better. So yeah, for melee weapons, Jasper is BIS. Depending on how you're playing your bow in PvE or PvP, you can go diamond, you can go onyx, you can go emerald. Emerald, also good for melee. But also changing the damage type of your weapon is viable. So if you're going to be killing a lot of angry earth, you can socket in a ruby, and that's going to give you fire damage. If you're going to be killing a lot of corrupted, well, you can take your Greataxe, you can put a sapphire in it, and then now you're dealing arcane damage. And then we talked about attunement synergies with the bow and the musket. So there's different ways of going about that. Also, if you convert some of your damage into a type, then that also synergizes with the harnessing. So if you're like primary fire staff, you have flame harnessing, or in my case, I have the void Greataxe, and then I have like void enhancements. Well, then I can just get all of that damage. Yeah, and when you look at the uptime on the Jasper, it's pretty crazy. So each stack has its own 5 seconds, which means if I don't take hits, you're going to watch it fall off. So times 3, times 2, and then it goes down to nothing. But then, like, yeah, if multiple things are hitting you, or you take a weak multi-hit like that, you just swing, and now you just have that damage, and it doesn't fall off on, like, a retaliation hit. You just have it. Jasper's OP. Oh yeah, I also noticed the next hit critical buff that I got, which kind of still makes sense on the bleed for this. So against bosses or like single target strong enemies, this is pretty good to have like keenly jagged on a greatsword because there is some kind of synergy there, especially if you're weaving in and out of like your defensive and offensive stances. So natural stuff that happens inside of weapon builds. Different weapons have different procs and different builds that you can also do extra perks into if you want to synergize with that. It's a lot, but hopefully I did a good job. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.